All right, welcome back to day 2 of the Summer Institute for Computational Social Science, hosted by Howard and Mathematica at Howard University. Let's pick up where we left off from yesterday. So we were talking about the workflow example, how to save your work, and a few notes on computational reproducibility. So let me share my screen once more. I want to highlight some resources for you guys. Do you all see the GitHub repository here? You can hear me okay? Okay, so at the bottom here, if you are a little hesitant about learning statistics, it can be very intimidating. I really recommend these first 2 books, especially the second one here. Jay's book is great, Computational Thinking for Social Scientists. And this is kind of about teaching and learning computational social science. So this is a really useful read. But the second link, the G.J. Kern's Introduction to Probability and Statistics Using R, is a great primer for kind of getting your foundation of probability and statistics using R. So it's written in an accessible way. There is some math for those of you who are interested in that sort of thing. If you feel intimidated by that, you don't really have to latch on to that, but there are a lot of exercises at the end of each chapter that use R. So if you're asking like kind of how do you solidify your knowledge, where do you go next, how do you sort of build your foundation for computational thinking using R, I really recommend this book here. And that's the second bullet point under resources. The next 3 are kind of, well, I should say the Wilkie textbook we talked about yesterday, right? That's kind of this language agnostic book about theory and best practices for data visualization. And then the next 2 are for using the tidyverse and kind of some more advanced preparation. So if you feel like you have that foundation and you're looking where to go next, I would check these 2 out. If you're interested in working with textual data, definitely check out the Silge and Robinson textbook, Text Mining with R, a Tidy Approach. This has a lot of helpful information to get started working with text as data. And if you're interested in machine learning, check out the James et al. Book. This is an introduction to statistical learning with applications in R, and this is the sort of holy book, if you will, for machine learning in R. And here you can see there's a lot of sort of advanced topics. Even if you want to figure out what is machine learning, read the first 2 chapters. Kind of gives you an idea of the basic vocabulary. This is an abridged version of a different textbook that's very math heavy. This one is very light on the math, and it's written in a very accessible way. And it talks about things like linear regression, classification, resampling, going beyond linearity, tree-based methods, some deep learning. So if you're trying to understand what's an artificial neural network or unsupervised methods, this is really the book to start. And I got references for others if you're interested as well. We'll talk a little bit today about hypothesis testing. I really recommend this R Companion website by Mangiafico here. And this gives you an introduction to kind of testing. What's a parametric test? What does that mean versus a non-parametric test? So start here if you're interested in the testing aspect is really throwing me off. And I kind of need some examples to get my feet wet and figure out, well, how does the hypothesis testing aspect work? And we'll talk about this a little bit more today. And then finally, one thing I want to highlight is this Duprel article, Confidence Interval or P-Value. And there's really a lot of debate about P-values and P-hacking and all these kind of criticisms about how do we determine if something is statistically relevant, right? Traditionally, we talk about it being statistically significant in some form or another. But here, Duprel and colleagues talk about, well, what are the pros and cons of p-values versus confidence intervals for point estimations, which is another approach to determining how do you know that your test is relevant? How do you know that what you are actually testing is meaningful in the statistical sense? So this is a good start point to figure out, well, what are my options if I'm trying to figure out, if I'm trying to test something, how do I know that it is statistically real or not? And then below here, there's a paper about writing, and then the remaining help links here are for some of the tidyverse packages that we'll talk about today, with some copy-paste walkthroughs and explanations. So again, you're not expected to read all these in the next 2 weeks or even 2 months, but just know that they're there. One thing I used to do back in the day would be wake up early on Saturday mornings and spend an hour or two reading this type of stuff and going through examples in R. So we know how busy you guys are, right? Like, how do you fit in something? You got to fit in something else to your schedule now. And if you can do it, if you can learn to kind of have these little sprints of 20, 30, or 60 minutes, even just once a week or once every 2 weeks, after a year, you know, if you take notes, you might have a binder full, you know, of some good, meaningful notes. So reach out to me if you want to talk more about self-learning, but this is kind of, you know, how you get started. So for today, let's go ahead and open up the part 1 RMD file. And for me, I have reset my R. I have deleted any saved memory. We know I can use my Files tab here to navigate to the part1.rmd file. And I click it, and it opens up here in Rstudio. But I want you to look at this little down arrow next to the Run button. And that's kind of strange because there's a bunch of little down arrows here, but the one next to Run. All right, so here you have options for running chunks. And one thing I could do is just click Run All, and that's going to run the entire Markdown file. Right, so I can get right back to where I was yesterday just by clicking this little down arrow next to Run and Run All. It's like, remember Jose was saying that these are basically the instructions, so we can just get back to wherever we were. Alternatively, I can scroll down here to around line 418 and click that Run down arrow and say Run All Chunks above. And that'll get me right back to this place here, but not further. All right, so let's do a little review. We'll say, what is variable assignments? What is a function? What is an argument? What are the 5 types of data we talked about? What are the 2 data structures? We'll say, what is a vector? What is a data frame? And finally, how do you view the help pages? So what is variable assignment, you guys? We kind of have this equation, right? This thing called the assignment operator goes in the middle. And we assign the thing on the right to the variable on the left. And this is just how we save data in R. We do this, you know, 95% of the time. Maybe if we're doing things like writing for loops, repeatable code, we might not do this. But generally, yeah, the caret operator, yep. Generally, we're going to be saving things as variables often because then we can reuse them. What is a function? Well, remember, the function is the verb in our natural language analogy. Evan threw the ball. Threw or throw is the function. The function performs an action on a thing. Those things are called arguments. And those things can be virtually anything. They can be functions or nested functions. They can be a single number, a complex equation, text from a book, a list of things, a vector, a data frame, or even multiple data sets. We talked about 5 types of data, right? Numeric type, those are our decimals. And that's the default type for numbers in R. So even if you think you have the number 5 here, right, by default, R is storing this as a great big long decimal. So this makes R very memory hungry. We talked about character data, number 2. Character data always wrapped in text. Always wrapped in quotes, I'm sorry. Even a number, right, can be wrapped in quotes and represented as text. We talked about logical data, trues and falses. You saw a little bit of that yesterday about how we can use true and false to turn arguments on or off. So if we look at read.csv, which we'll give you some more practice with today, excuse me, we looked at that strings as factors argument here. Should character vectors be converted to factors? True is yes, false is no. And any other logical parameter like that works. True is on, false is off. Talked about integers, right? We talked about these as dot functions, as dot integer, as dot character, as dot numeric for data type conversion, and mainly for summarizing data, visualizing data, and testing data. You may need to change the format of the input to get the correct output. So you can do some type conversion with these as dot factors, with these as dot functions, sorry. And then number 5 was factor type, and that's just how R represents categorical data. So what's a vector? Do you guys remember the sort of copy paste definition from yesterday? If you scroll up, yeah, C function. So we can say question mark C. The default method combines arguments to form a vector. All arguments are coerced to a common type, which is the type returned. So it's an ordered group of the same type of data. Equals ordered group of the same type of data. And in a data frame, what do these vectors form? Do they form the rows or do they form the columns? Yeah, so really good, you guys. Yeah, really burn that into your brains. Because a data frame can be thought of as an ordered group of equal length vectors. And again, this is the strength of the tabular structure of data. A spreadsheet, right? Something that's organized in 2 dimensions into rows and columns. The columns, a single column can only contain one type of data because it's a vector. But different vectors of different data types can be lined up next to each other to form multiple columns. And this is what produces different types of data across rows, heterogeneous data across rows. Okay, then we talked about package installations a little bit. Remember, that's a 2-step process. You have to install it. You have to physically download the files from the CRAN repository. This is the comprehensive R archive network, and you can kind of get a list of all packages and find out what CRAN is. That's the first step, that physically downloads the files to your computer, but then you have to link those files to your current session. And we can do that with the library function. You only have to install the files once, but each time you close and reopen Rstudio, you want to run the library file to link those files again. Right, if you're a little more advanced and you're looking for a package manager, I recommend Pacman. There's a good tutorial here that helps you manage your packages. Let me know if you have questions. Okay, so importing data is a big sticking point for a lot of people. As I said yesterday, it took me like a year or two to self-learn this back in 2007 or so. I just remember being so frustrated and crying, like I'm never going to be an academic. I won't even be an academic light. I can't do this. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know where to find help. I don't know who to ask for help. I don't know how to ask for help. I don't know how to articulate questions. I don't even know how to express what I'm struggling with. So we talked about two ways to do this yesterday. The first was with this button on the environment pane, import data set, right? So you can click that and click from text base. This will import a CSV file. Remember, a CSV file, a comma separated values file, is just a text file where commas tell a spreadsheet program like Microsoft Excel where a column break should go. So we can click this and we are provided with a dialog box here. We can double click the data folder, look in the raw folder, and then select AZ Mesa 2020 and click open. Here we can change the name to maybe something a little more short and sweet. We can check our strings as factors box to ensure that any columns of character data will be given factor or categorical grouping properties. And this is generally advisable. If you want help reordering factors and learning about factors, I think Jose put a link in the chat yesterday. Maybe if you can find that again, Jose. R tries to be helpful. And as many of you noticed, it's just going to order them alphabetically. But that may not be what you want, right? Maybe you have a Likert scale where if R orders your factors alphabetically, they get out of order. So you may have to do some wrangling to fix that. But here's what our input file looks like. Here's our CSV, all these commas where the column breaks should go. And then when we import it, we're going to get this nice rectangular data frame. So we click import, and R automatically opens up the view function with a capital V. Oh my gosh. And yeah, Rumi Sinor says, in our state-funded project, we manually save string as factor on Excel 1 by 1. Yeah, that probably took an eternity, right? And that's not fun. Also, it's prone to human error, right? Maybe you misclick something or you have a stray keystroke, you mistype something. And it really detracts from the fun part of looking at the data, of making those visualizations and running your test. Yeah, 21K rows. Okay, so we can click around here. We have 96,000 rows here. We can click our little filters. And this is the capital V view function. Alternatively, we can hard code this with read.csv. And our basic building blocks still ring true. So we're going to call this data set Mesa, and we use the read.csv function. Now, read.csv is going to do a search for a text string, so we know that this file path has to be in quotes, because it's looking for a location of this data set in the form of a file path. But we don't have to remember that file path. We can just press the tab key. And we can do it one by one. I can press return on the data folder or click it with my mouse, press tab again, click the raw folder with my mouse or press enter or tab and press the tab key again and find AZ Mesa and load it this way. But we would have to hard code that strings as factors equals true to convert those character columns to factor type. Now, if we were looking at a data frame of movie reviews or book reviews or tweets or something, we might not want to do this. Matter of fact, we probably would not want to do this because we want to keep that text as text. So that's a big question about, well, when would you not convert strings to factors? Maybe you have a data frame of mixed qualitative and quantitative data. Could be interviews along with survey data, Likert scale or something. Well, in that case, if somebody's giving you an open-ended response, you would not want to convert that to a factor. You would want to keep the text as text. So we can import this and then look at str to bring up our compact structure of the data frame, get a sense of what the variables look like. Remember, the $ specifies a column. So if I wanted to make a histogram of subject age, what would I type? Using this $. What's the function to make a histogram? Good, yeah, hist. And one of the best things to do is always check out that help page. How do I access subject age? Remember, I type the name of the data frame, Mesa, followed by the $, and then all those columns come up, and I can scroll down to subject age. And how do I run some code? There's a couple different ways. So Control Enter is the fastest. And remember, you don't have to highlight the line, or your cursor does not have to be at the beginning or the end. It can be anywhere on that line for the most part. There are exceptions to this. And you just tap Control Enter. And I get that vector of ages, which, as you can see, is truncated based on memory purposes. So I get the first 1,000 and then it cuts off. And then I could wrap this all in hist. There's my histogram or box plot. And so on and so forth. Okay, remember head shows the top 6 rows by default. Is.NA is going to return missing values. So if we look at is.NA of Mesa here, what's returned? Where have we seen these before? Here's our true and falses, where true means data are missing, false means data are present. But we know that true and false take on mathematical properties, right? True is equal to 1 under the hood and false is 0. So if we wrap this in the sum function, we get the number of trues or the number of missing cells, which seems like a lot, 13,000, but given the fairly large size of our data set, we can take this value, 13,324, and divide it by the total number of cells, the number of rows in Mesa, and the number of columns, 19, and see that we actually have less than 1% of the data missing. And so we're just getting to know our data. Remember, we talked about subsetting with this bracket notation. Anything before the comma refers to the row indices, and anything after refers to the columns. So we're still performing assignment here. We're going to call this variable clean. We put our assignment operator in the middle. We want to subset Mesa, so we type Mesa and then we set up our brackets. And here we're just saying, give us these columns. And if you want to return column names, you can even just type names. So now when we look at str of clean, we have a little bit more manageable data set. All right, so I try to run str of clean, and it says object clean not found. What have I forgot to do? I'm trying to call a variable that doesn't exist. Yeah, thanks, Susanna. Yep, so we have to assign clean. And then str will work. So we went from 19 columns down to 7 that we want. And the same thing here, we could use names of clean. Oops, names of Mesa, sorry. To refer to these columns by their index. So date is 2, subject race, age, and sex are 8, 9, 7. I've just entered them so that race will appear before age, and sex, 10, 12, and 13 are the officer ID and hash, the type, and the violation, along with the rest made. All right, then we kind of made some summary tables here. So we can use the table function. Or if you want proportions, you could use prop.table to say, well, what's the distribution of the race variable or the arrest made variable? What does our sample look like? Or we can make some cross tabulations by adding 2 columns here. So if we want to look at arrests made by race, we can get a nice summary table this way. Then again, using your domain expertise, say, well, kind of eyeball this and say, does this make sense? Does this support my assumptions, or does it run contrary to what I thought? We can use the summary function to get those 6 number summaries of continuous variables, minimum and maximum, first and third quartile boundaries, median and mean. And then we get frequencies for categorical variables, but as you can see, they get kind of truncated into other categories. And we also get NAs as well. Okay, from the psych package, we can use something like describe by. So I try to look at the help pages for describe by, note the capital B here, but it says no documentation for describe by. What have I forgotten to do? I'm trying to access files from the psych package. The files are on my computer. Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. So we can say library psych. And then if we try it again, check it out in the console. I can even use my up and down arrows to go through my history, which is also contained in the history tab here. And now I can say, give me summary statistics for the clean data set. But we're going to use the $sign to say, well, group them by sex. We're going to save this as a variable called summary sex and print it to the screen. So we get summary stats for female drivers and for male drivers. And then we can subset these tables as well. So check it out. Summary sex $. Now, because we grouped by sex, and there are two groups here in this case, right? As social scientists and humanists, we know that sex and gender is infinitely more fluid than these distinctions. But often in police reporting, this is what you'll receive. Well, we can use the $ to go a layer deeper into this table. And then we could say, just return age and columns 3 and 4. Right, so our subsetting works on a variety of objects. Or we could also refer to those columns by their names. So if we just wanted mean and standard deviation, or just skew and kurtosis and the standard error of the mean, we could just type those here. Okay, so again, try to use this as a sort of mirror for your research and say, what do my data look like? Or if you're seeking out data, what kind of data should I be looking for maybe? And then how could you apply some of these functions to your data set? And it doesn't have to make complete sense right now. Remember, it's a marathon, not a sprint type of thing. But conceptually know that these things are possible. The code will come with time. Yeah, and Jose put a great example in the chat. Okay, so we've loaded our data. We've done a little wrangling. We'll do more wrangling here shortly. But now maybe we want to investigate, are there differences in sex, race, and age within our data? So we can eyeball it. We made a histogram of age before. You can use the breaks argument, right? If you look at the help file again, we have all these options we can customize. Breaks, there's even a find in topic search bar here where you could search for breaks. There's a bunch of different ways you can specify breaks. We'll say 5, and then you can use the main argument to include a title. So here's our 5 breaks. Our title says include a title. We can use XLab to change the X-axis label, YLab to change the Y-axis label, and LAS, label axis style, to show how the tick marks, how the values on the tick marks should be represented. Should they be parallel or perpendicular to the X-axis? And LAS equals 1, we'll just make them both parallel to the X-axis. Click your zoom button here, and you have a new window you can resize. Let's see how it'll look. Maybe that looks a little bit better, but we'll use Ggplot here in about an hour to make even nicer ones. And R provides you 657 stock colors to choose from. You have 101 gray colors. So maybe you're up all night making your figure for your dissertation in beautiful color. And you run to the grad division to file, and they're like, we only accept black and white grayscale. So you got to run back home and readjust all your plots using a gray color palette. So if we look at gray 90, that's towards the wider end of the black-white color spectrum. Contrast that with gray 10, which is towards the black end of the black-white color spectrum. So maybe gray 50 is a nice medium. All right, so again, experiment with this stuff. We can use box plots, right? So a histogram illustrates the distribution of a single continuous variable. We can use box plots to do the same, but it's a little easier to parse by a categorical or factor variable. So here we want to look at age still, but this time we're entering this formula. And the tilde means by, or parsed by, as parsed by. So you can think of, let's make box plots of age by sex, or age by race. And you might not see all the labels here, so click the zoom button and resize your window, and they'll pop up. But we'll use Ggplot a little bit later to make this look really nice. So maybe we can assume ages are similar by sex and race. But we don't know until we analyze this. And our eyeballs are not good enough. And this is why formal statistical testing exists. So maybe we ask a question like, are there statistically significant differences in arrests made by race? Something like a one-way analysis of variance can help us understand. And so we're going to look at mean variation by groups. And this might say, we're still performing assignment. So we're going to save this in a variable called AOV race. AOV is the function for fitting an analysis of variance model. And we want to look at number of arrests made by race. And then we can run the summary function on that to produce test statistics along with a p-value. But we see a statistically significant p-value here. You can use your significance codes down here to figure out that significance. But how do we know between which groups? So for many tests, post hoc or after the fact testing is necessary to dive a little deeper and say, well, between which groups do statistically significant differences exist? Right, and this is based on the common threshold of p is less than 0.05. We're not going to get too much into hypothesis testing, so please contact me if you want. So a Tukey test for honest significant differences will provide this for us. It will also adjust the p-value to account for family-wise error. So if we're doing the same test a bunch of times, we probably want a more conservative threshold for what is considered statistically significant. And we just plug our AOV object in, and we get a table like this. Right, so we get Tukey multiple comparisons of means at 95 family-wise confidence interval. We get the function call. And then we get the pairwise differences, along with the mean difference, the lower and the upper confidence bounds, and the adjusted p-value. So we're really interested in a p less than 0.05 here, which a lot of them are. So this diff, this mean diff, applies to the first group in these pairs. So here, this difference is saying it's very small, maybe not something we would recognize with our eyes, but that Black drivers are significantly arrested more than Asian Pacific Islander drivers. Same thing with Hispanic and other. Here, white drivers are arrested less, note the minus symbol, at a statistically significant p-value than Black drivers, and so on and so forth. Okay, so now we're kind of confident we have this sort of paired approach. I like doing, for anything I'm investigating, I like doing a visualization and then sort of a test to back up that visualization. Using the visualization sort of as the conversation starter using my expertise to tell you why this visualization is important, and then backing it up with results from a test or summary statistics. So I like those things to kind of operate in tandem when possible. Okay, so now we can interpret this, right? And this is really where you have to put your, as my advisor, Izumi Shimada used to tell me, you have to really sell it. You know, it's a hustle. Like you have to, it's up to you to creatively interpret these things within the constraints of your data, within the constraints of your resources, and within the constraints of the tests to convince your audience that this is important. So determining who your audience is very important. Like we said yesterday, are you talking to elementary school children or the general public or other professionals at a conference, right? So determining that is kind of how you want to structure your writing. Did we even apply the correct test? Did we violate assumptions of this test? Every statistical test has assumptions that should not be violated for it to be considered valid. Do we have sample bias in our data? Do we have size bias in our data? Should we use a different test, right? So this is really where the legwork comes in about finding the appropriateness of what you're doing. And can it stand up to peer review and criticism, and so on and so forth. All right, so that's kind of that's my workflow. And no matter if I'm doing machine learning or working with text as data, or I'm web scraping or connecting to an API to get data, it really does all follow this sort of kind of workflow here. Like it doesn't matter what I'm doing, I always kind of follow the structure. And that allows me to, especially for this milestones part, say, okay, if my deadline's a year from now, I need data 1 month from now. I need to get it into R 2 months from now. I need to wrangle it and summarize it 3 months from now. I want to have those visualizations done 6 months from now. Those tests need to be done at month 9, and then that leaves me 3 months to write. This is ideal, and it's, you know, hard to stick to something like this, but it at least gives me, you know, a checklist where I can feel like I'm making progress as I check off kind of each of these boxes. Okay, so questions about that. We're going to talk about saving our work, and then we'll give you a challenge question. We'll take a break, and then we'll dive into the tidyverse. We probably won't be able to get to everything, but I'd rather help you guys really solidify this stuff. You can always read ahead and reach out to me if you have questions. So what are you guys working on? Does this make sense? Do you have, you know, do you have anything you can add here? Are there steps you can skip? You know, so that's partly rhetorical, but keep this in mind as you go forward. Okay, so Binder users, if you are using Binder, make sure that you check the files you want to save, use the checkbox, and then click the More tab and click Export to download them to your computer. We can save things locally using write.csv. So remember read.csv. If read.csv is for data input, write.csv is for data output. And how many arguments are here in write.csv? What are they? If we want to save the police data frame, we just have 2, right? Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. We have the variable name and then the file path where it should be stored. So we're going to save this in the pre-processed data folder. And then if you go look there, you will see there's police.csv. And if we open it with Excel, we can now share this with our colleagues. I can send it to Jose. He can check my work. He can run his simulation on it. We can publish it. Right, so there's that little data frame we use. So where does it save if we don't specify the folder location? Well, we can use getwd to print the path to our working directory. So mine is set to the parent folder, SICSS-Howard Mathematica R 2022. Yours might say desktop or downloads. So again, it takes some practice, but just know, we're here to help. And finally, we can use the save function to save our data files. So if we just want to save the clean data set, and we restart R or we email it to ourselves, we don't need anything else from this script. We can just load this file, clean.rdata. We're saving the clean variable in a file called clean.rdata. So when we open up part 2, we're going to clear our environment and we're simply going to load this file and clean will be there. Okay, and then just a quick note on computational reproducibility. It's very common for people to come to me and say, hey, Evan, my project's almost done. I want to make it reproducible. If you want to think about making your project reproducible, it's something you want to consider very early on in the process because it's hard to do retroactively. Here is a nice kind of reproducibility checklist from Roger Peng, and it gives you some tips to look out for. Yes, Susanna, please go ahead.
I was just not sure. I understood the last portion of the clean data. Where is that going to save?
Yeah, so yep, so that's a great question. So that's going to save in our data preprocessed folder in a file called clean.rdata. So it's actually saving here. So that variable is actually saved in this file. And this will make sense in a moment. We're going to do the challenge, and then when we open up part 2, we can just load this file and the clean variable will be there. The clean data set will be there. We don't have to do any pre-processing.
But what I'm wondering is that if it is safe within R or it's safe within a folder in our computer.
So both. So the variable clean at the moment is saved as a data set in R, and it's also saved as a file on our computer, but we're about to erase our environment, and then it will only be on a file on our computer that we can then load up. Does that make sense? Hopefully it'll make sense when we open up part 2 here.
Hi, Evan, I have another question.
Sure.
Yeah, so yesterday I was trying to do like the exercise and I made a mistake. Is that I use clean, but I don't save it on the same file name, and Rstudio wouldn't let me continue. So do you have to save as the same name? Like, can you save it as like clean2 or, clean-part2?
Yeah, in the file name you can, exactly. But the variable here can only be the variable as it's saved in R. Yeah, these are great questions.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, and then BJ asks, does RData or CSV take less space? I'm always having problems running out of memory. Generally, RData files are going to be a little bit smaller, but it depends on the nature of the data. And your best bet for large data sets, I don't know which universities you all are coming from, but you may have a kind of a resident condo cluster supercomputer on your campus that is maybe found in your IT department or data science department that you should be able to access through your faculty advisor or using your staff privileges. If you don't, reach out to me, and there's a lot of solutions to give you access to more storage space and to greater compute power. All right, so you all try it. So let's take 10 minutes here, and we'll go through this as a group, and then we'll take a break. But reproduce the above workflow of summarizing data. Well, scratch that, of importing data, wrangling it, summarizing it, visualize it, and testing it using the CA Oakland 2020 data set. And ask the question, kind of like we did here, how does the distribution of arrests vary by race? Maybe you could use a bar plot in this instance. How do you make a bar plot? Save this in a variable named oak. Use the save function to save it in a file named oak.csv in the data preprocess folder, and use a Ggplot to make the bar plot. If you're familiar with Ggplot 2, we're going to cover that here towards the end of class today, and then ask yourself what other statistical applications might be useful. So take a few minutes here. I just want to make sure you guys get this. If you can get this far, you can do research. I'm sorry we're going a little bit slow, but everything after this is kind of the icing on the cake. So try to figure out questions, what doesn't make sense, what vocab terms are you struggling with, and let Jose and I know. So take about 10 minutes. We'll give you till 12:20. We'll go through this as a group, and we'll take a break. Just going to step away for a moment and ask questions during the challenge here. Go for it. Yeah, Susanna asked a great question. Do you recommend using R Markdown or an R script? And the answer is both are fine. For me, I generally stick with an R script, just a plain text file. Just because I like, for me, I like the stripped down version, like less is more type of thing. And that's just for my personal sort of use. But if I'm doing something for a publication or collaborative in a team or something that I'm going to present, then I'd probably use an R Markdown file because I could convert it to a PDF or an HTML file like this one, or a slideshow, and so on and so forth. So as you go along, you'll kind of find that both have their uses. And it kind of depends what's the end goal. Yeah, Javante, as Jose said, click File, New File, and there's your R Notebook or R Markdown options. And as you guys can see, you can do a bunch of other stuff here in Rstudio. You can also access that by clicking this R Script button down here. So maybe you want to do some Python in Rstudio. And then a lot of Rstudios will come with a terminal built in.
This is so cool. Are we having fun yet? Happy Sunday.
Yeah, and then this jobs tab here, if you're fitting a model and it takes 20 minutes to run, you lose the functionality of your console. But what you can do with the jobs tab is kind of schedule those jobs so you don't lose the functionality of your Rstudio. Because what you would have to do is open up another Rstudio. And then again and again and again, and you might eat up all the memory on your computer. So again, you got my email. Don't hesitate to reach out. Yeah, and I want to reiterate that from yesterday with your, you guys are paying to go to school. Be persistent and professional in your asking for help. Get what you want. You got to make it happen. Nobody else is going to make it happen for you, right? Sorry, I'm corny. You know that from yesterday, though. Okay, how do I load up CA Oakland 2020 dataset? Anybody got some code or some button clicking instructions? Yeah, so open file is not going to work. It's good intuition. But remember, we want import dataset button from text base. Look in the data folder and the raw folder, and then CA Oakland 2020 to get the Oakland data. Alternatively, Yeah, Imani and Erica say, let's use read.csv. So we can say data frame, right? We could literally call this pizza or donut or something, right? Variable names can be anything. We'll say df, and df is equal to read.csv. And then we go through this process again of finding that location. Oh, we want the raw folder. And we set strings as factors equal to true. And then we can run str on df to get that critical information. And in the Oakland data, we have 133,000 rows and 28 variables. We only had 19 variables in the Mesa, Arizona data. All right, good, thank you. So did you make a bar plot? Could you figure out how to make a bar plot of arrests by race? Or did you do something else? Did you make a visualization? Don't forget about your solutions file as well. Cool, let's see, Susanna, we got. It's undefined columns. Yeah, so this is let's see, that looks good. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Undefined column selected. Sorry, D. Yeah, does anybody see the error here? There's a question in the chat. Yeah, there's exactly. Good eyes, you guys. Yeah, great. So instead of violation, we want the violation column. Yep. Like I said yesterday, you'll spend hours and hours and hours just, banging your head against the screen with this type of thing. Okay, so for solutions, here we can maybe make a quick subset of race and arrest made. Call it Oak sub. We can summarize it, right? So there were 16,000 arrests out of the 133,000. We can table this to look at it by race. And we can see that Black drivers were arrested the most, but they also make up the largest proportion of the stops. But is this proportional to the other groups or not? Or is this somehow considerably more or less, right? So now again, we're thinking about issues of sample size, of representation. Where could the bias in these data be? Is it okay to compare things that have a small sample size in one group to a large sample size in another group? So if we make a table like this, the bar plot's a little tricky because you have to tabulate the data first to get the count. We can then use bar plot to look at just the trues, right? That's what this comma 2 is saying. And make something like this. And we say, well, it's very, very clear that Black drivers are arrested more than other groups. And so again, using our domain expertise, why is this the case? Is this a problem? Can we do something can we use data science to influence policy? Can we change the behavior of how people are treated in society by police? Can we advocate for better policing practices using data science? Okay, and then we can plug this into an ANOVA like we did above and see that. Make this a little bigger here. Okay, so again, it looks like Black drivers are arrested to a much greater degree than other groups. So again, using your domain expertise, why? Why is this a problem? How can we influence policymakers, politicians, governments to ensure the fair treatment of people in society? Okay, so this is just one example. Like I said, try to use it as a mirror for your research and say, really, what am I asking? How can I kind of take this stock setup? Yeah, absolutely. So how do we create the frequencies? And that was just using the table function here. So we know that table is going to give us the frequencies of something. So if we wanted to look at race, we could just look at race like this, and we get the frequencies for the number of observations by race. But then we can create the actual crosstabs by adding a second column here. So now we want to look at driver race by was an arrest made, true or false. And we get this tabular structure here. So then to plug into the bar plot, we're saying just take the second column from arrests, the true column, were they arrested or not, and plug it into the bar plot. Does that help? Yeah, and Susanna says true is equivalent to 1. Exactly. And so that goes back to this kind of duplicative identity thing of all these moving parts, right? So true is true, but true is also 1. And since true takes on these mathematical properties, we can actually do math on true, whereas we can't do math on text, so to speak. All right, and then like we did before, we can actually, there's an error here, you guys. We want to just have 1 slash here. Then we can save the Oakland data frame in our data file called Oak in that pre-processed folder here, so we can just load that up. Okay, and then if you wanted to use Ggplot2, we want to make sure we save some time to get to Ggplot2. So let's take a break. Let's return at 12:42 PST. Turn at 12:42 p.m. PST. That is, my gosh, 3:42. All right, so think of questions. I'm going to go refill my cup and take a stretch, but we'll see you guys in about 15 minutes. I think that's 15, right? Yeah. All right, great job, you guys. Great work. Jose and I were really proud of you. Thanks for your engagement. This is a lot of fun. Go take a stretch, take a power nap, make a phone call. We'll see you in a few minutes. Yeah, so we still got about 5 minutes here, but you know, I want to let you guys know I'm here for questions.
I just have a quick question, but can you hear my voice?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I tried to do this kind of frequency table here, but like when I type table data name and the column name, I have so many trues and falses on my screen. Is that okay? I mean, am I doing right?
Which data set are you using?
This kind of oak, what was the last thing that we were doing?
Yeah, so for oak,
Yeah,
and then which variable were you trying to make a table of?
I tried to make this arithmetic.
Of arrest made here.
Yeah.
Yep. So if we say table oak of arrest made.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mhm.
So that's binary, right? That's just zeros and ones, falses and trues. Now, are you trying to add another variable to that?
Yeah.
And which one is that second variable?
Maybe race.
Okay. So we could say table of oak $ subject race, comma, oak $ arrest made. And we get that nice table there again. I think the issue is if you try to use let's see, was there maybe like age, right? There's so many different categories of age, or maybe what's a better one to use? Maybe if we try outcome. Yeah, because the problem is if you use a variable that has a lot of categories, it has to tabulate the crosstab for each of those categories. So you might end up with a great big table. Outcome. Yeah, so trying to think here. Maybe something like, yeah, like let's use location. Location would do it. So if we did table of oak $ location by oak $ arrest made, right? In this case, we're going to get a huge table that may not be very informative because there are so many categories in the location variable. And then, yeah, just randomly, you guys, this is a good, remember we talked a little bit about data cleaning yesterday and how standardization is a problem. We know that R is case sensitive. So here we have 5 different entries for Washington Street, but they're all the same. So Washington ST, all caps Washington ST, Washington Street period, Washington Street capitalized, and then Washington Street all caps. Same thing with 12th Street here.
I have a follow-up question as well with
Sure.
the table.
Please.
Yeah, so I was trying to type to just for example, that example. I noticed like when you type in the console, but I was trying to type in the console as well, but like the predictive text isn't coming up. So I wasn't sure if I was doing something wrong.
Yeah, so in the script, I think it will appear automatically. What happens if you type in the console, type tab for table? Does it pop up?
Let me try that again. TB. Yeah, okay, it pops up now.
Yeah, and who knows what the reason could be. It could have to do like if you have an older version of R or something.
Okay.
It's really hard to say, but yeah, keep trying things out, keep experimenting. These are great questions.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, and we are back, everybody. So go ahead and save your work, close your part 1 RMD file, delete all the variables from your environment. Click session, restart R. We have a blank slate and open up part 2. And if you can get that far, go ahead and the library, all these libraries, you can just do them one by one, or click the play button here to run the whole chunk and see what happens. And then for the next few minutes, I'm going to work from the part 2 HTML file in the HTML folder of the workshop materials. And we're gonna do a few deep dives here. I know we got a late start today, and I want to end at 5 p.m. Eastern time, 2 p.m. Pacific time, to be respectful of your time and make sure you can get a break before whatever it is you have to do next. And tomorrow is Monday, so it feels kind of like a Friday, but tomorrow is the start of the week. So one of the main problems is that, you know, in contrast to part 1, data are not always nicely formatted for exploration and analysis. So we've had some nice data tables so far, some nicely formatted CSVs, but often before we clean and subset the data, we actually have to reshape it first. And we want data to be in a tidy format, kind of like we've been talking about, where each column contains a single observation for a single entry. So I just clicked this tidy link here. Most statistical data sets are data frames made up of rows and columns. The columns are almost always labeled and the rows are sometimes labeled. For tidy data, we want every column to be a variable, every row to be an observation, and every cell is one value. Anything that violates this sort of 3-piece rule here can be thought of as messy data. So what are some signs of messy data sets? Well, the column headers are values, not variable names. Multiple variables are not stored in single columns. Variables are stored in rows and columns. Multiple types of observational units are stored in the same table, and or a single observational unit is stored in multiple tables. This is just a few examples. There are others. So we're going to speak a slightly different dialect of R now, one that uses pipes. And this is going to allow us to use the power of the tidyverse. And pipes, you just think of them as taking the thing on the left and piping it into whatever is on the right. So we can still do variable assignment with pipes, where we assign the thing on the right to the variable on the left, but we can now structure our code in a little bit more efficient way. And I really recommend this chapter from the R for Data Science book on pipes. But we're going to go through a bunch of examples here. So what's the tidyverse? Well, the tidyverse is a suite of R packages that work together in this sort of interlaced way, and that allow you to kind of streamline your computational workflows from data acquisition and import to cleaning and wrangling to summarization and visualization and analysis. And they have neat little logos and names. So we're going to focus on tidyr, this one with the brooms, dplyr, the one with the tools here, and then ggplot 2. We can connect all this stuff through pipes. We can also write more efficient code. We can do more complex tasks with less code, and we can make our code easier to read and interpret. So if we return to a project in a month from now, our code will make more sense to us, hopefully. And if we're working with collaborators, we have a standard upon which we can agree. We will all write our code. Okay, so let's use pipes to look at two main functions to reshape data from the tidyr package. Pivot longer, we're going to increase the number of rows. So we're going to make the data set longer and decrease the number of columns. This doesn't change the data itself. It simply changes how the data are shaped. The data is exactly the same. All right, so if we make a data set longer, we sort of take it from like this format and we reshape it to this long format. The inverse is pivot wider. These functions improve the usability of gather and spread, which are now deprecated. This is the old way to do it. But pivot wider, we take a data set like this that's long and we kind of rotate it and make it wide format. Okay, so here are the arguments for these two functions. In pivot longer, the arguments are names to and values to. We'll explain what this means in a minute. But just note the to convention here, names to, values to. In pivot wider, it's opposite, names from and values from. So we got to pass in 3 arguments to pivot longer, the columns, and then names to and values to, but only 2 to pivot wider. All right, so let's take a look at what this looks like here. Where are we at here? Okay, so this is an example of pivot longer. So here, maybe we have a group variable in our wide data set and then individual IDs as columns with group observations here in the rows. So what we're going to do is basically take those IDs and give them their own column. right? Group is basically going to stay the same. But then we're going to take the observations from each of those columns and we're going to put them into these yellow boxes here so that the values get their own column. So essentially these ID columns would be names too, and we're going to say collapse these into a single variable. And then the yellow boxes here in this wide format would be the values too. And we're saying take these values and combine them into a column called measure. So as you can see, the integrity of the data is maintained. For ID 1, we still have measure 1098. And we have, for group C, 3049 here. That says ID 4. Okay, so why are these data not tidy here if we look at this little challenge? So remember, if we go back to our tidy sort of convention, where was that? So this is our tidy convention. Yeah, Christina, so in general, we'll talk about missing values a little bit later, but generally they do, yes, because what we're left with is these would be called implicit missing values. We'll talk about implicit and explicit missing values. So in this format, there are missing data. And this is one of the reasons why you might want to reshape your data, because when you reshape it to long format, you're actually getting rid of these implicit NA values. So in this instance, yes, but I can't guarantee that will always be true. Yeah, okay, thanks, Asha. Asha says variables are not columns such as year. So these data are not tidy because ideally we would want a country column, a year column that said either 1999 or 2000, and then a values column that contained the values for the corresponding country and year. Great, okay. So let's pivot along. Okay, so let's take a look here. Here is pivot longer. Don't be intimidated by this, you guys. We're going to go through it line by line here. Okay, so check it out. We're still doing variable assignment. So we're taking table 4A. We can print this to the console here. Here's our little table. And we're piping this in to pivot longer. And trying to think, what is the shortcut here? Insert.
Evan?
Yeah.
One thing that you can do in R that is perhaps something that you cannot do in other programs is that you can change the structure of like what you're doing, just two variables or two like year and whatever, right? Like, and then the other parts of the columns stay intact, remain intact, right?
That is correct, yes.
You don't have to reshape the whole data set, just those two variables.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. And exactly with R, R wants you to be explicit. So if you don't tell it to, well, I should say the tidyverse wants you to be explicit and define exactly what you're doing. And if you don't, it's going to leave it unchanged. Whereas base R might be more prone to making some changes without notifying you. But the tidyverse is kind of telling you to make sure that if you want something changed, be explicit. Otherwise, we're going to leave it alone. Okay, so we can insert a pipe. We can either type % greater than %, Shift, yeah, so that's a lot of keyboard shortcuts, or you can press Control Shift M on Windows or Command Shift on Mac to enter a pipe here to your heart's content. Okay, so we're saying take the data, table 4A, this little table here, and pipe it into the pivot longer function. And we know that we got to get those years into a single column and then get the corresponding values into a single column. So we're saying take the columns 1999 and 2000 and rename them to year. And then take their corresponding values and stick those in a column called cases. And that's it. So we go from this wide format data set to this long format data set. So the data are the same. For Afghanistan in 1999, we see 745. We still have 745 for Afghanistan in 1999. We see China 2000 is 213,766. We see China in 2000 is still 213,766. Okay, so now we can make a histogram of an underscore for of cases, which we wouldn't be able to do with this data set very easily. If you get the error message, error in plot new, figure margins too large, that just means your plotting area is too small and you should adjust your Rstudio to print it. Okay, so that's one example of why we would want longer format data, is for visualization purposes. But there's another problem. Did you catch it? And it says year has been automatically converted to character type. By default, pivot longer is going to transform uninformative columns to character type. And you can fix this problem by using the names transform argument. So here an easy function, this is kind of an intermediate trick, but we're doing the same thing in here. It looks messy from all the comments, but we can stick in the names transform column argument and simply say in a list, parse year as a number. And what do we get here? Where, well, year has been converted to a double or numeric type. Remember, this is the default for R. What does parse number do? Do we have parse number here? Yeah. So if we have a name like reply 1994, parse number is going to extract just the number. And as you can see, there's a bunch of different ways that you can parse things, kind of like our as dot functions. If you need to just remove a text part or a number part, you can use these parse functions from the readr package. So again, it might be 6 months or a year from now, and you'll be like, oh, that's what that guy was saying in that workshop. It makes sense now. Yeah, so what about as dot integer? So what if we do this? Right, we're back to our character type. One quick way you could do it is kind of like we did before, is say ready for a $ year. is overwritten as dot integer. Ready for a $year. And maybe we have to as dot character. Yeah, the behavior of some of this is interesting. And I think, yeah, that's a good question. I was calling this uninformative. I think because it's parsed in the tidy way with backticks here. Table 4a. Right, because generally you can't have column names that are a number in a data frame in R. But this is a tibble, so this is the tidyverse version of a data frame where you can have column names that are numbers. But to do so, you have to wrap them in the backtick, which is the key to the left of the 1 key on an English keyboard. Not a quote, but this little backtick here. And as such, tidyverse is interpreting that as character type.
Could I just say something really quick, Evan?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I just wanted to so the pipe operator, the McGritter pipe. So some people were having some confusion about like what happens after that operator gets put in, and so like something that I want to say is that people should think about it as like telling R like, hey, there's this thing that I want to do something on, right? This pipe operator is like, there is an additional argument that should be provided, right? It's like telling R, hey, here's this, we're piping that data onto the next like line, and we're doing some kind of transformation or function or something to that effect. I think that some people were a little confused on why things weren't happening when there was no arguments after the pipe operator.
Yeah, that's a great point. So we could actually think of right, almost think of the pipe operator as a right arrow, right, with the greater than symbol here. So we're saying take table 4a and then pipe it into a function. So think of the pipe as an operator rather than a function. And we're just taking the thing on the left this time and piping it into the thing on the right. So this time we're saying take the data and pipe it into this function. Let's do a couple other examples and we'll try to answer your questions here. Okay, so why is this data not typed? Billboard. And I think Asha had a great explanation from before. And then how might you fix it? Yeah, thank you. So the weeks should all be in a single column. And as you can see, we have the tibble output is trying to print only what's available in the width of our window here. So it's saying we actually have, 70-something week columns. And here are more examples of them. And these should all be in one column, and then their corresponding values should be in a second column. So here, because we have so many of these week column names, we can actually use the starts with function to define the columns that should be formatted to long type by saying any column that starts with WK should be combined into a new column called week, and their corresponding values should be moved into a column called rank, and we want to drop any missing values. So that billboard ready looks like this. Here we got Tupac together, and so on and so forth. All right, so again, hopefully conceptually, this is making some sense, but interrupt us, ask questions. Jose, please jump in if you have clarifying points. Again, the code will come with time. But for columns, we're just saying which columns should be converted to long format. What should the name of the variable be? And then what should the name of the corresponding values become? And then in this case, drop the missing values. Okay, why are these data not tidy? And the hint is right below. Right, so each observation is spread across 2 rows. For Afghanistan, we have 1999 cases, and we have 1999 populations. Yeah, exactly. Cases and population can be a single variable, or they could be multiple. They should be separate variables. So what does pivot wider do? Well, we're going to do the inverse of what pivot longer was doing. So now we're just literally doing the inverse of what pivot longer does. Pivot longer has everything in this format, but now we're going to convert our number or ID column to a set of individual columns. And then we're going to take the corresponding measures and add them to their respective columns. So we're just doing the exact inverse of pivot longer. Okay, so what does table 2 look like? Well, here we have it. So now we want that from argument scheme, right? Pivot longer uses names to and names from, along with a columns argument, to specify what columns should be made long. But this time we're just saying, take the names from type and the values from count and spread them out. So now again, if we wanted to do something like a linear Pearson correlation, we could simply do table 2 ready, $ cases, and table 2 ready, $ population. And see that they are super correlated. All right, so we couldn't do this if those columns were combined into a single column. And so again, this idea of tidy data is what makes visualization and testing so easy. Easy, remember, easy doesn't mean simple. Or I should say simple. Simple doesn't mean easy. Okay, so a lot of times consultees will ask, well, I don't have missing values in my original data frame. Then R said I do have missing values after I've done some data transformation. So what happens? So R identifies missing values in 2 ways. Implicit missing values are simply not present in the data, but after reshaping, they might appear because as you see between these wide and long formats, by changing the shape of the data, we might actually introduce missing values versus explicit missing values. Explicit missing values are those that are designated in A, which is the only way R is going to identify missing values. Okay, so consider this. Consider this stocks tibble. We can use the tibble function, similar to how we use the data frame function. And then we can define our columns in this toy Tibble inside of the Tibble function. So here we're saying create a year column. This is just a vector, 2019, 2019, 2020. Here's that column. A quarter, 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4, and return 1, 2, 3, and A 2, 3. So if we use pivot wider to widen this Tibble, what's going to happen to the number of implicit missing values? So you guys take 5 minutes, use pivot wider to widen this data frame into a data frame named stocks wide. Okay, peek at the solutions file if you need some help, if you want a hint. But give it a shot. So we only have one missing value here in stocks, but how many missing values are we going to have in stocks wider? Go for it. Take about 5 minutes here. Yeah, Erica says now there's more missing values. And if you kind of look at this, hopefully this gives you some idea why, right? Because now we're spreading out some identifying variable that was previously contained within a single column into multiple columns. But there's only one value associated with it. So all those other spaces or cells are going to implicitly be populated with NA. So again, this should hopefully is giving you a light bulb moment about how your data are formatted and how you might be able to handle missing values. The best way to handle missing values is, of course, to not have them in the first place. But guess how much data we're missing for my dissertation? I studied some skeletons from the first millennium BC in Italy. Take a guess, what percentage? Higher. Higher. Yeah, 50. So you can design the best protocols, even if you're going door to door to collect a survey or something, and you expect to have complete data sets, but something goes wrong. You forget to make a question required on a survey. People skip past it. There's coding errors. You lose the provenance. You don't know what that response, who that response belonged to, so you have to drop it. Right, so the best laid plans often go awry. And there's a lot of kind of tips and tricks. You can even impute data. You can substitute the column mean. For example, it's not advisable. Something more like the median might be more advisable because it's less sensitive to outliers. There's multiple imputation, generalized low rank models, all these ways you can impute missing data. But there's also kind of these reshaping, tricks that might get you far in certain circumstances. Okay, so Erica, would you mind sharing your code? Cool. Okay, thank you. And we'll say, all right, so we're taking stocks and we're piping this into the pivot wider function. Pivot wider requires two arguments we know, names from and values from. And we get something that looks like this. Now we have that wide format data. So this is kind of like our first example, right? So now we have the return and then the year. And then the values have been given their own cell. If we look at stocks, right, we only had one missing value for 2020 Q2. We still have 2020 Q2 here, but we've had to add that extra column. So there's nothing to put for return or 2019. The data are the same, but now we have these implicit missing values in the wide format data. So then you want to ask yourself, are these data really the same? Maybe not. All right, so in the interest of time, let's just keep moving here. I want to get through a little bit of dplyr, give you some challenge questions, and then make sure we do at least a little bit of visualization with ggplot too. I see a hand. Please go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick question. Just to run this pivot wider function, which packages we need? Because I'm seeing an error. Maybe I thought I just tidy
up. Yep.
Okay, then maybe I just forgot to load the package. It happens.
Yeah.
Okay, then. Yeah.
Great. Yep. Go up to the top, and it should be in that first chunk.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so finally, all right, we're struggling through our workflow. Our deadline's coming up. We got some data. It wasn't formatted how we thought, so we had to do some reshaping. But now we can actually kind of wrangle and manipulate it. Remember those kind of clumsy bracket notation stuff we were doing earlier? Well, we can expedite that using the dplyr library. All right, so an easy way to do this is a small handful of functions from the dplyr library, mainly filter and select and group by. So let's talk about those. So remember how we saved the clean data set from our part 1 markdown file way at the bottom here. And then we deleted all the variables from our global environment, restarted R. Well, that clean variable is still saved in this clean.r data file. So look at what happens to our global environment if we run line 226. It is back. We can run str to get it. Or if you want to delete all those variables from before and just load up the clean.r data file, there's that variable. And this is good if you do a bunch of pre-processing on a data set. You always want to keep that script. You always want to document that process and keep those instructions. But if you have a large data set, this can eat up a lot of time and memory. So you can simply save the clean version as an R data file and then load it with the load function. Okay, so let's look at a range. Here we can use namespace resolution. So a good way to keep track of the packages and functions that you use is to use this double colon scheme. So here you can type the name of the package followed by 2 colons and then the function name. Again, this is called namespace resolution. We want to be sure we get the arrange function from the dplyr package. So we could even type our help like this. And this specifies that we get this particular function from this particular package. So how does the arrange function work? Well, we can look at the clean data set and arrange by subject age. And this is going to give us a low to high default sort. And as we saw yesterday, the youngest driver who was arrested in Mesa was a 10-year-old. We can use the desc, DESC function within arrange to specify descending order. So the oldest drivers were 99. We can also use the minus symbol to specify descending order. Get the same thing. All right, what if we want to change some column names? So what are the names of clean? What if we want to drop subject from before race, sex, and age? Well, we can use our pipe. So let's overwrite our clean data set. So we're going to reassign clean as clean, and then we pipe clean into the rename function. And we type the new name is equal to the old name here. So we want the new name to be race for the column subject race. And then a comma if we want to do multiple columns. We want the old column name subject sex to be renamed sex. We want the old column subject age to be renamed age. And lo and behold, we have done so. Exactly, yep. Yeah, so the question is, can we do that in one line? Absolutely. What do we say? New name equals old. Okay, so let's subset some rows based on a single condition. All right, so let's create a data frame called female drivers. And we're going to perform assignment here. So the clean data set is going to be piped into filter. Filter is how you subset rows in dplyr.
Even I have a clarification question.
Sure, please.
I just realized that you are piping twice, and before you were just piping once. So can you tell us like
These two
what?
here.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so we can string together as many pipes as we want. In the above example, we were just piping the data set into one function. But now we can continue that chain of pipes into as many functions as we want.
Basically, you just ask if you add another function, then you need a pipe.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, great question. So each time you add a new function, it gets its own pipe. Exactly. So we're piping the data set into filter, and we're saying, give us only the rows where the column sex is equal to female. And then we're piping that into the arrange function and saying, arrange that by age.
Wait, but you don't have head, you don't have another pipe after arrange, but you have head after that?
Yeah, so think of these as separate here. So this is the piped operation that creates the data set female drivers, and then we just look at the head of female drivers. Now, these are good clarifications. Thank you. So this creates the female drivers data set that only contains rows where sex equals female and that are arranged by age. And then we look at the head of that. And then we can do this for multiple conditions for subsetting rows. So what if we want a data set comprised of old males? We can pipe the clean data set into the filter function and then specify sex should be equivalent to male and age should be greater than 90. We don't need and or, we can just use a comma here. And then pipe all that into the arrange function by descending age. Oof. All right, and then we only have males in the sex column sorted by descending age. Okay, so you guys try it. Use filter between, we haven't seen that yet, to subset a data frame that contains only drivers between the ages of 10 and 13. So how might you get help for between? Question mark, dplyr, between. All right, so maybe if you scroll down here to the examples, maybe you can get a little hint. Otherwise, check out the solutions. Take a couple minutes, see what you can do, ask questions. I think it was Susanna. Thank you for all the questions. Please speak up, message in the chat or DM myself or Jose.
Could I say something really quick about just using functions in R? So I just wanted to say, so if you ever are trying to run a function and R says, hey, we can't find this function, like the pipe or any sort of function that you're trying to use, it's probably the case that you don't have it loaded in the library that that function belongs to. So just double check and make sure that that library is loaded in.
Yeah, excellent, great point. And the error message, you know, it's hard and it feels intimidating, but read that error message and try to interpret it the best you can. If I say, let's see here. Say detach package R. Aha. So if I say no, now here, let me do this. Right, so if I try to use the filter function, dplyr filter. Yeah, that's a bad example. Trying to think, arrange. It's still loaded in. Yeah, so my packages are stuck in my session here. Start R. How about pivot longer? Ah, nope, it's still. Yeah, so generally, if I try to do something like, I'm trying to think of one here. Here is Kramer V. It says no documentation for Kramer V in specified packages and libraries. You could try question mark Kramer V. And nothing is found either. But I know that the Kramer V function is from the desk tools package. And I don't have it installed either. Oh my gosh. Yeah, Susanna, so the The double colons is not necessary. It's just a good way for you to keep straight in your code to make it as explicit as possible where the functions are coming from, which package they're located in. So sometimes there are functions that have the same name that are found in different packages, and they do different things. So I'm trying to think if we do something like question mark subset. Here, let's load dplyr subset. Trying to think of a good example here. Range. Filter, yeah, so if we look at the help for filter, we see that there are two different packages that contain a function called filter. One is from the stats package that does linear filtering on time series data. The other is from dplyr that subsets rows. So to make sure we know we're getting the one from dplyr, we can use this namespace resolution, this : to be sure that we are getting the filter function from the dplyr package. Does that make sense? It's just another way to be super explicit. And if you and I and Jose are collaborating on a project, you would want to do this so we know exactly what function you're using. And this is also problematic if you make your own function called filter, right? Susanna's filter, that does something, that does a third task.
Can I ask my question out loud really quickly? So if you, for instance, know the name of the function, but you cannot for the life of you remember the package, and you're trying to figure out the package, can you still search it with the help page, or is it not going to come up because you don't have the package?
Yeah, I would actually turn to a search engine for that, because you can say something like Kramer v documentation in R. And usually the first hit is going to give you the package name here. So this one is from R companion. Or if you do something like, trying to think of what's a good one, maybe. MCA documentation R. And then again, that first hit from R documentation is going to say this is from the factomine package. Yep, so it's kind of a chicken and an egg thing. How do you know what function you're supposed to use? And kind of learning to search for these things is a skill unto itself. It's a great question. Okay, let's take a look. So this is a great discussion, you guys. Thank you so much for your engagement. It makes our job so much easier. All right, so we're looking at filter between. Well, we can look at the help for dplyr : between. Two values fall in a specified range. We can look at the usage. X is the vector, left and right are the boundaries. So if we want drivers between the ages of 10 and 13, we can plug in the between function in the filter and say, look in the age column for drivers between the ages of 10 and 13. These are minor drivers, and we have this many. And then here's their information. Right, again, we're performing variable assignment. We're creating a data frame called minors. We're piping in the clean data into these functions. In this case, they're nested. And then we get the following output. All right, so let's look at group by and summarize. Let's do this together here. Okay, so group by is also from dplyr. And this allows you to assign grouping properties to some calculation. What does summarize do? Well, this allows you to basically create summary tables of your data. So what if we want to create a new table that contains average age and standard deviation by sex and arrest made? We can kind of continue our, whoops, this is the solution. Let us, yeah, so let us subset column. Sorry, I got ahead of myself there, you guys. Okay, so filter filters rows. Select will subset columns. So what if we just want the date and arrest made columns? We can create another subset. We'll call this tibble or data frame sub1. And we're piping in the clean data set into the select function. And we're just typing in the name of those columns. So notice a theme here about the tidyverse. We no longer need brackets. We no longer need the C function to vectorize things. We no longer need the $sign to specify columns. And that's one good reason to use the tidyverse, is because it's trying to clean up the syntax for you all. So here we're just saying pipe in clean to select and return just these two columns. And we just get date and arrest made. We can subset only numeric or integer columns with the where function. So we can say select where the column is numeric type. And that's going to return only columns that are continuous. We could subset columns that contain the letter S with the contains function. Require contains. This help file isn't terribly intuitive. But if we look at the names of clean, what columns contain the letter S? Sex, officer ID hash, and arrest made. Sex, officer ID hash, and arrest made. What if we want columns that start with the letter A? Names of clean, well, there should just be two, right? Age and arrest made. So here we're using the starts with function. And here's age and arrest made. So one thing I do want to point out, if we go back to the repository here, are these Rstudio cheat sheets right in the middle. So a lot of this stuff, kind of like what you guys are asking, is like, how do we know what to use, you know? So there's cheat sheets for Ggplot 2, and this second one is for dplyr. And here's a bunch of the functions with quick little descriptions that tell you what they do. So distinct will remove rows with duplicate values. That sounds super useful. Slice will select rows by position. Add row will add a row, and so on and so forth. So what I used to do is, like, I would print these out and hang them on the splash guard of my kitchen sink. So when I was washing dishes, I could actually be reading these cheat sheets, and I'd swap one out every week. Right. So again, you're busy. How do you find time to do these things? Find ways, you guys. Okay, so one easy way to create a new column is the base R way. We can just type the name of our data set, the $sign, and then the new column name, and then assign it something new. So here we're saying take age and divide it by 10. Right, so here's our new column, the base R way. But in dplyr, we can use mutate, and mutate is going to add a new column to an existing data frame. So let's do a quick review in the chat here. Title R, pivot one, add rows, decrease columns. Tidy R, pivot wider, decrease rows, add columns. Dplyr arrange, sort by value. Dplyr rename columns. Dplyr filter rows. dplyr select columns, dplyr group by, group by category, dplyr summarize, create new summary table, and dplyr mutate, add new column to existing data frame. So maybe take a screenshot of this chat here just for some notes. Like I said, I wish we had 6 days instead of 6 hours. And there's always so much to cover. So if summarize creates a new summary table, mutate is going to create a new column in an existing data frame. So in this case, we use mutate to add a column called new dplyr, and we're going to say, take the age and multiply it by 10. Right, so new column name, this is how we did it the base R way. And then new dplyr, this is how we do it with dplyr. We can delete columns simply by specifying them as null. So we're back to our original. Okay, count does exactly what it says. Count is going to count how many. So this is similar to table in base R. We can, again, create another subsetted data set where we pipe clean into the count function. We want the sex column, and we say sort equals true to put the sort in descending order. So here we have 56,000 male drivers, 39,000 female drivers. Now we can do the same thing by including group by sex before counting. And we get the same thing. Right, here's another example of summarize. So what if we want to summarize age by sex? And we want to take the average age. Well, look at what we're doing here. So we're creating a new data frame. We're performing variable assignment. We're piping in the clean data set into the group by function, which is saying whatever we're going to do, we want to group it by sex. And then we're using summarize to create a new column that's going to give us the mean of the age. Now look at this here. We have a single equal sign. Average age is going to be the name of the new column. That goes on the left-hand side of the equal sign. And then the actual computation is going to go on the right. So take the mean of age. And what do you guys think NA.RM means? You can even look at the mean help function to figure it out. Yeah, good call. A logical value. Should missing values be stripped before computation proceeds? Right, so here we have a nice little summary table. Here's the average age of female and male drivers, as well as the NAs. So again, whatever's to the left of the equal sign inside of summarize is going to be that column. Or donuts. But again, keep your names and your variable names and your column names short and sweet, descriptive of their contents. So maybe we call this average age. We can also summarize by multiple conditions. So what if we want to group by sex and race? Again, we're performing assignment. We're creating a new data frame, sexes, age, and race. We're piping the clean data set into group by, but this time we're grouping by sex and race, and then summarizing the average age. And then we get the average age by the combination of sex and race. We can include multiple computations. So what if we want to include average age and the sample size? Well, we can do everything the same as before, but this time put in a second condition into summarize. So now we're saying count equals n. N is how dplyr counts things. So basically think of it as the sample size. So now we have a nice summary table of average age and the sample size by this combination of sex and race. Okay, so an example of mutate. This is how we add an existing data frame. I'm sorry, a new column to an existing data frame. And if you guys have seen if else, this is a way to kind of include multiple conditional statements to recode data, for example. We can use case when. So what if we have our ages, right? Our age is continuous, $$ age. So what if we want to, make these into bins? We can use this case when function, apply case when, to essentially say, if age is greater than or equal to 80, rename this categorically as elderly. Then, if age is greater than or equal to 18, rename this as adult. And then finally, if age is less than 18, rename this adolescent. And as you can see, we create a categorical variable out of continuous, a previous continuous variable. And then we can run something like table on that to figure out, well, what's the dispersion of these categories now that we've binned them. And again, with mutate, we can add a simpler computation. We can just say, add the average age by sex to our original data set clean. So for females, anytime you see female for sex, it's going to say 37.7. And anytime you see male, it's going to say 37.2. All right, and then there's a little information about how you can create publication-ready tables with Cable Extra and with Flex Table here. So you can create automatically formatted tables like so.
Ivan?
Yes, please.
With these tables, let's say you have to rerun your analysis and rerun the table. So you just simply do the same code. You don't have to change anything.
Correct.
Okay.
And it's going to take whatever is stored in the variable and port it to this formatted table. All right, you guys, so let's do one more challenge. Maybe I'll ask you to stay 5 minutes late here to talk about Ggplot real quick, but please just try this real quick. Combine, group by, and summarize to create a new table that contains average age and standard deviation by sex in a REST mode. So take 5 minutes. We'll go through this as a group, and then we'll just touch on Ggplot 2, and we'll call it a day. And please keep asking questions. You guys are asking wonderful, wonderful questions. Right. Anybody have some code they would like to share? Right. So the first line of our code is kind of standard, right? We're performing assignment. We're taking the existing data frame. We're going to pipe it into something. Of course, you could do all of this on a single line of code. Summarize, right, like this. But I really like to press return after each pipe because this gives me the freedom to add a comment at the end of each line. Group by sex and arrest made. Remember yesterday we talked about kind of making those concept maps. Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. All right, we'll use Rebecca's code here. And Rebecca says create Tibble sub 1, and we're piping in clean data set. And in this code, saying just take these two columns. This is kind of optional here. Group by sex and arrest made. And here's the standard deviation, and we can simply add in the mean age like we did before. Mean of age, na.rn equals true. And here we get this little warning message that says, yeah, no problem. Output grouped by sex, you can override this with the groups argument. And that's just saying whatever you put first in group by is going to be the first column. So if we were to switch arrest made and sex, arrest made would be first. Table sub. All right, so here again, using your domain expertise, you might ask, well, why for females who were arrested, their mean age was lower and had a smaller standard deviation? Same thing for male drivers. For those who were arrested, their mean age was lower and had a smaller standard deviation. Based on your expert knowledge and your domain expertise, why might that be important to tell your audience? How might that be important for affecting policy decisions? Why should your audience care? That's what my advisor used to ask me. Why should anybody care? That's your job, is to be convincing. Okay, good. You guys, this is so much fun. I wish we had another 3 hours, but I do realize it's the end of the day for a lot of you. So let's just touch on Ggplot real quick. We've been using these pipes here. For Ggplot, we're going to use plus symbols to essentially add multiple layers to a plot. So everything gets its own layer. And if you've worked in photo image manipulation software like Photoshop, Illustrator, GIMP, or ImageJ, you're working in layers, right? So if you make a mistake somewhere, you can just edit that layer and all of your work is not for nothing. So Ggplot 2 is going to operate the same way, and there's some more great resources here for you. Okay, so basically, why should we care about data visualization? Well, sometimes pictures are better tools than words for exploring, understanding, and explaining data, especially if we have very complex things that make sense to us in our head, and we're liable to make a lot of assumptions about how we explain things. Basically, Visualizations might help us explain these in more concise and more plain ways. Okay, so there's a motivating example here, the Anscombe's quartet, which I'm going to kind of skip here. I'll show you what it looks like, but essentially you can create something. I just want to teach you guys the basics here very quickly. But you can create in this much code here something like this. Okay, so Ggplot is allowing you to make very, very informative and complex visuals in just a little bit of code. Anscombe's quartet is this sort of classic statistical example of you have 4 x variables and 4 y variables with very similar means and standard deviations and stuff, but they all look different when they're represented visually. Okay, so the grammar of graphics for you guys, how does this apply? Well, basically, we need several things to make a Ggplot. We need data. We need aesthetic attributes. That is, how do we specify color, shape, size? We need geometric objects to represent the data, you know, whether these are points, lines, bars, ribbons, so on and so forth. We can include the use of stats if we want to map some sort of statistical information to our plot. And we may need to adjust scales and coordinates if we want to adjust the spaces in which the data are visualized. And finally, we can talk about faceting, which is essentially what we've done here for these data. Now, this is kind of more of a biplot, but if we want to create individual plots for grouped data, we have the option of putting, for example, females and males on the same plot, or we can facet it out so that females appear on one plot and males appear on a second plot. And then there are various ways to create actual compound figures. Okay, so let's try this. Okay, so just for a scatter plot example, I realize we're at time. So we can assign our plot to a variable called P, and we use the Ggplot function. For this, we're going to use the Gapminder data. And within this mapping argument, we use the AES function to say, put GDP per cap on the x-axis and life expectancy on the y-axis. Well, what do the Gapminder data look like? Error object Gapminder dot not found. So if we load that library, we have a data frame of socioeconomic data that contains categorical variables, country and continent. You can see years stored as an integer, and then life expectancy, population, and GDP per cap. All right, so here we're saying put GDP per capita income on the x-axis, life expectancy on the y-axis, and give us our base layer. All right, so we haven't found any actual data. We've just created the base layer. Now we can use various geoms to specify how these points, how these data should be represented. And if you type geom underscore, you're presented with a host of options. We want geom point to make a scatter plot. We can use something like geom smooth to add a smoothing line. And we could essentially, in our AES up here, specify color as consonants. To give each point a different color.
Thank you all for watching. For more information on SICSS-Howard Mathematica, visit our website, follow us on social media, and join our email list.